sounded a lot like a scared kid running up the stairs. I was thinking, okay, well, they didn't come all the way up. I know I wasn't imagining it because even my dog lifted his head and kind of looked towards the door.
Listeners, old and new, welcome back to Hey That's Weird, the podcast that tries its very best to deliver you authentic, spooky, and weird stories told by the experiences themselves. It's episode 17, and it seems like years ago that I was putting the finishing touches into episode 1. In reality, it's only been 6 months or so. If you're a Hey That's Weird OG listener, welcome back. If you're new to the show, welcome to the family, and thanks for stopping by. This week, I wanted to extend thanks to Jade, Indy, Shanna, Big Zach, Whippy, Frankie, Adriana, and all the usual suspects for their comments and interaction on the socials. And a very special thanks to Chris for leaving me such a nice 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. If you want to help the show grow, tell a friend or family member to check it out. For those who've already done that, thank you so much. This week's storyteller is Leanne from Alberta, Canada. I recorded with Leanne a couple of months ago, and I've been waiting for the right time to use her story for an episode. Leanne's story isn't necessarily just one experience, but a number of odd occurrences while working her job as a funeral director. Leanne, it was so nice to talk to you, and I really appreciate you being so vulnerable about some of the smaller details in your stories. Anyway, listen to it for yourselves, I don't want to spoil anything. So without further ado, Leanne, let's get weird.
My name is Leanne, and I personally love listening to true crime and spooky podcasts. My sister recommended this specific podcast to me because she knows I really enjoy things that are strange and scary. I never really had many stories to share myself until this winter when a collection of small, strange occurrences took place in my life. They weren't massive, in-your-face events like some of the stories I've heard on these types of podcasts, but I figured that I'd share it anyways. For me personally, sometimes I connect more to those small stories because it's more typical of what we experience in our lives anyways. So, a bit of a backstory about myself is I was always interested in being a detective, a homicide detective specifically. But I learned at a young age in order to be a homicide detective, you have to be a police officer and kind of work your way through it. And as someone who was born legally blind in my left eye and it's not fixable, that's not a career path that I would be able to go down. So I ended up taking forensics classes in high school, and my teacher had someone he knew that worked in the funeral industry, and then another person I worked with at a grocery store worked in a crematorium. Because of those encounters, it kind of shifted my focus into the funeral industry, and I discovered here in Canada it is 1 year to get your funeral director's license. So that seemed really reasonable to me. So I started my schooling when I was 17, and then when I was 18 years old, I got my first job at a funeral home. And then when I was 19, I was officially a licensed funeral director. After the birth of my first child, I did leave the industry for over a decade, but I recently became licensed again and returned to the profession after the death of my mother. She struggled a lot with illness throughout her life, and then when she passed, I made mention to the funeral home that we were working with that I used to be a licensed director, and they offered me a position. I'm pretty sure my mom would have gotten a kick out of how all of those events played out. She was always really encouraging and proud of my career choice, Most other parents might have questioned my sanity, but she was always there supporting me. Anyways, on this one particular day at work, there was a graveside service that I was working. What a graveside service is this means that we are performing a burial. There was no funeral, so just a brief service right at the cemetery where the body is interred into the ground. So we had to drive about an hour to get to this specific cemetery. This service was for a woman who was a devout Christian and had lived a very full and long life. I was driving the funeral coach, which most people know as a hearse, by myself, which I don't mind, but I do dislike long commutes. They're incredibly boring to me. Even though it was just an hour, I consider that long. So I decided to turn on a podcast. I didn't know how to connect to the Bluetooth in the funeral coach, so I shut the radio off and was just playing the podcast off of my phone. I was listening to one of my favorite scary podcasts called Scared to Death. It's something that I really enjoy, so I was just listening to the newest episode. The drive was going well, and I was about halfway there when suddenly, out of nowhere, the radio turned on by itself. I figured maybe the lady that I was transporting didn't approve of my podcast choice, so I said, okay, I'll shut it off. Maybe she didn't want to hear spooky stories that day, and since this was her last car ride, I let her be the DJ, and I just kept the radio on and my podcast off. Later that same week, we had a few viewings at our funeral home. So this is when loved ones come and pay their final respects to the deceased's body at our funeral home. I do enjoy my work, and I hold a lot of respect and reverence for the deceased and their families that I serve. And that means often when I'm alone and locking up at the end of the day, sometimes I'll say a simple goodnight to our guests, or I might even tell them how lovely their families are. So that night, as I was heading out, I bid our current deceased guest farewell, and I told him that his family was really great and I had the joy of meeting them, and that I got the vibe that he was probably a pretty good guy in life. Later that evening, I was upstairs, and only my daughter and I were home. I was in the kitchen when the TV in the next room turned on by itself. This was pretty strange because we had just bought the TV and it was brand new, just got it about a month prior to this. I didn't really think much of it. I just grabbed the remote from the drawer and turned the TV off. I was on a cleaning kick, so by that a little bit later I had grabbed a carpet cleaner and was upstairs carpet cleaning the couch in my TV room. When I turned the carpet cleaner off, I noticed that the TV was on once again. I was pretty spooked by this point in time. I thought something strange was going on. I had never experienced anything like this before. So I quickly called my daughter out of her room after I had shut the TV off again. I told her that the TV turned on by itself twice. She was looking at me like I was a little bit crazy, but as she was standing there, the TV turned on again. My daughter looked at me in surprise, and then she said,
"Turn on your favorite TV show."
And almost instantly, the channel changed to David Letterman. We were both pretty shocked by that. Never had something like that happen to me before, especially with my daughter there to see it. So it was kind of nice to have someone else experience it with me, to know that, it's not just in my head. I'm not going crazy. There was something strange happening, and ever since then, my TV is never turned on by itself again. Part of working in the funeral industry is making sure that your suits are always really clean and pressed, so I had worn it a few times, so it was time to wash it. I took off my name tag, and the funeral home that I work for, we wear pins with the funeral home logo on it, so I took that pin off. I placed them together on a shelf so that I wouldn't lose them. They're both pretty small. The shelf was kind of off to the corner in my room. It's not something you would really see unless you went over and looked at it. The next afternoon, after my husband and I had a conversation about whether or not someone might have followed me home from work, I speculated it could have been either the woman I had transported or maybe the gentleman that I spoke to. I went into our room to grab some clothes to go on the treadmill because it was minus 30 degrees outside and I did not want to run outside in that. When I walked into our bedroom, I noticed that my funeral home logo pin was now in the middle of my dresser. My husband swears he hadn't touched it and he was pretty freaked out. Again, insinuating someone probably followed me home from work. So during this brief period of strange occurrences, I had another one which probably spooked me more than the others. I have ADHD, and with that, I'm usually up pretty late. My circadian rhythm seems to work a little bit differently than most people, so I find it really difficult to go to bed before 1:30 in the morning. So I'm usually up extremely late. Anyways, so the kids were all asleep and my husband was asleep and I was sitting in bed kind of scrolling through my phone. Our dogs were in the bed with us too. Our bedroom has about 5 steps leading up to it. It's on its own floor above the garage and the kids are downstairs on the main floor. Our children both know that they can come up to our room anytime that we're scared. We kind of have an open door policy that way, so it's not uncommon for a scared kid to come running up to my room sometimes, and I let them sleep on the floor or in our bed. So I was scrolling through my phone, and I heard 3 very fast steps up the stairs. Only 3, no more than that. It sounded a lot like a scared kid running up the stairs. I was thinking, okay, well, they didn't come all the way up. I know I wasn't imagining it because even my dog lifted his head and kind of looked towards the door. So I sat there for a second, waiting for the door to swing open, but nothing happened. So I called out, hello, expecting one of the kids to pop in or something like that, but no one answered. I was thinking, if my kids are scared, they're not going to stand out in the dark hallway. They're going to come in right away. So it was a little strange that no one had come in yet. I cautiously got out of the bed and opened the door, and no kids were there. I was a bit concerned for the well-being of my kids because I knew what I had heard, and I wanted to make sure everything was okay. And although I was scared and I didn't really want to go downstairs, I listened to a lot of true crime podcasts, so I couldn't live with myself or fall asleep if I didn't go check it out. So I went downstairs and the doors were all locked. I checked both of my kids' rooms and they're fast asleep. I even opened my app on my phone for my alarm system, and it has sensors throughout the house, and it tells me anytime a door has been opened or closed or locked or unlocked, and there was no sensors that detected movement or anything like that. So that means my kids did not move around and then go back to bed. I was a little unsettled by that because I wasn't sure who or what was running up towards my room. My husband told me I should really stop talking to the deceased people at work, but the empathetic side of me has a really hard time doing that. So since then, everything has been really quiet. No surprise radio changes, no ghostly channel surfing, no moving items, and thankfully, no mysterious footsteps. But I still say goodnight to our guests at work, just in case anyone's listening.
Given her job of working in a funeral home, I wondered if Leanne had a shared interest in the paranormal topic with her co-workers. Here's what she had to say.
We do. Me and my other coworker, we kind of are on the same page with thinking there's things here and there. Some of my managers, people who have been in the industry for a lot of years, a lot of times they roll their eyes at that kind of stuff. So some of the people I work with don't think that stuff happens. I don't know. There's no exact science to this kind of stuff. So sometimes part of me thinks too, if you're not open to seeing things, you won't But if you're paying attention and willing, maybe you're more likely to acknowledge it, or maybe people are more likely to reach out to you. I'm not sure how it works, but yeah, one of my other coworkers, occasionally we'll hear like little things in the kitchen at work and stuff, and we look at each other and she'll say, "Oh, that's George." Kind of the joke we have. But the funny thing is when I worked in the funeral industry years ago when I was young, I worked for a very large funeral home, which means I was encountering a lot of deceased individuals. I never had anything strange happen to me at that point in time. Nothing at all whatsoever. But I don't know if losing someone personal in my life has made me more in tune to stuff like that. But I will say, I do feel like with age and experience losing someone myself, I do think I am a more empathetic funeral director. So maybe in turn that makes me more approachable for people on the other side of the veil too. I'm not sure.
I also wanted to know if Leanne's family share her beliefs, or if they had been affected by the same things that she has.
Yeah, so my husband is a believer, but he's more of a scared believer. He's like, don't talk to it, don't do anything with it, leave it alone. And I'm cautious, but then, yeah, the other side of me too, I humanize them because, they were humans on this earth at one point. And I just think like how scary and lonely it must be, if they're stuck trying to find their way through. I don't know how it all works. There's no exact answer to any of this. So I just think, how lonely it must be for them if they're confused or lost or whatever. So there's that side of me, and he just doesn't want anything to do with it. My kids, I talk about my work with them too, but I also try not to freak them out too much because I don't want them in my bed every night. That my daughter, seeing what she did think that was really spooky and interesting. But I don't think she felt scared because she was with me when it happened too. Truthfully, up until the steps leading up to my room, I never felt scared with any of the stuff that was happening because I figured if it was someone that was from my work. And I knew a little bit about their families and who they were in life. And those families that we were serving, they really seemed like great and wonderful people. So I thought, if it's person A or person B, that's okay. Because I think I have a fair idea that they were good and decent people. So they're trying to reach out to me. I don't have as much of an issue with that. But yeah, I would never want to see a physical manifestation of anything. That's for certain. And I didn't really enjoy hearing something run up my stairs. That was also not fun.
Finally, the question I like to ask all my storytellers. Was Leanne a believer in the paranormal to this day? Here's her response.
I think it's really easy to be a skeptic in today's day and age because everything needs to be bigger and better and outdoing the next story. So when you listen to a lot of people's quote-unquote true accounts of things that have happened, sometimes it can be really difficult for me to understand that actually happening to someone. So those kinds of stories that seem really out there and far-fetched, I think, increase the skeptic in me. But then when I hear some of the more subtle, subdued stories, those ones actually freak me out quite a bit more because that's the kind of stuff that I could actually see happening. So I do think there is something out there, and one of my favorite quotes is, "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy." And I think that's really, really cool because it talks about how there's so much more in this world than we could ever understand. And I think the mistake as humans is thinking that we have the capacity and ability to understand or know everything that's out there. And I think our brains are limited. So maybe there's just some information that we will just never have because of our limited capacity to understand and our limited capacity for knowledge. So I think there's a really high chance, and, I consider myself a Christian too, so I would like to believe that there is a heaven and a hell, which means maybe there's a place where people get stuck finding their way when they pass. And then I do know when my mom passed too, something that really helped me believe that there is, paranormal on the other side and that sort of thing is a few days before she passed, she was talking to her mom and dad who had passed years before. I do remember when we went to visit her a few days before she passed, she was just sitting there rocking back and forth in pain, just saying, ow, ow, ow. And my sister was trying to talk to her and get her attention. And she asked her, I hear you've been talking to Grandma and Grandpa. And then my mom just suddenly stopped and looked her right in the eyes and said, yeah. And they said that they love you. So that was a really interesting moment for us. And then when my mom actually passed, she was with her best friend. And right before she passed, she sat up in bed and reached in front of her like she was reaching for someone. And she said, Mom, Dad. And then she lied down and put her head to the side and passed. It's kind of interesting because there's a lot of families that have come into our funeral home. And I've had a couple people mention that, their loved one was seeing loved ones passed before they passed too. So I think it's kind of a nice idea that maybe they come back to get us, in situations of death that allow for it, where they can come back and get us and bring us to the afterlife, whatever that looks like. So that experience in my life kind of helped convince me more too that there is something out there, whatever it is.
As usual, all my guests on Hey That's Weird get an opportunity to talk about something they want to advertise, or something they're passionate about. This one is pretty important. Over to you, Leanne.
I can say another thing that I'm really passionate about people understanding and talking more freely about would be suicide awareness. As someone who works in a funeral home, this is something I encounter a lot, unfortunately, and it's a really big and heavy topic, and I see firsthand what it does to families. I have seen children grieving the loss of their parents, parents grieving the loss of their children, and it is just so catastrophic, truly. I have seen a lot of children lose their life from it. And one thing that I wish all the children who are thinking of this and who do complete suicide would know is that, when you're young, your life is so limited because you don't have control over your choices. You don't choose where you go to school. You don't choose where you live. You don't choose these things. But if you can just hold on, when you get older, you are in control of your life. You can choose your career. You can choose everything. So you can really change what things look like. So I wish young people who are thinking of suicide specifically would understand that, as you get older, things can change and you can be in control of your destiny more. It's just, I know being a teenager, everything feels so final and so dramatic, but it really is worth just continuing to live and finding that help that you need. And same for adults too. We see a lot of people midlife ending their life, and it's just, like I said, really catastrophic for families. So if you are someone out there who has been affected by it or is considering it, I beg you to talk to someone, because I can guarantee you mean a lot more to people than you realize.
And that does it for episode 17. A big thanks to Leanne for sharing her story and being so vulnerable while doing so. With all the nightmarish things happening in the world right now, my only goal with this podcast is to bring a little bit of an escape to myself and my listeners. If you have a story to share and you want to record an episode with me, reach out to me via Instagram at HeyThat'sWeirdPodcast, or via email at HeyThat'sWeirdPodcastMail@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening, and a special thanks to those who listened all the way through. Until next time, stay weird.